Hello, I'm on vacation in Edinburgh, Scotland right now. Brought my painting supplies with me, but I'm not going to be painting this video. Instead, going to be talking about the infamous murderers, serial killers, Burke and Hare, William Burke and William Hare. So what I'm really going to be doing is a little street tour, going to try to edit it together, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so this is Argyle House. This is Westport here. And so Tanner's Close would have run basically right through where this wing of it is. Burke would have lived right about in here. So yeah, there was a building that was here. Burke would have lived about here. Reimer's shop, which I'll get to later, would have been a little further. And then the Logue house where Hare lived would have been on the other side of this building. We're going to go around and have a look at all that later. So yeah, I'm in Edinburgh right now and not doing any painting, doing some sort of on-the-scene reporting here about Burke and Hare, the infamous murderers of 1828. Sort of one of the attractions of Edinburgh. You can see you can't see the castle from here, but we're almost below the castle. It's up there somewhere, other side of the building here. And so, like I said, I'm going to go around to the other side here and be right back. So here we have, this claims to be Tanner's Close. The real Tanner's Close was actually paved over in around 1902, 1903. This was a whole big slum area. So again, Burke's house would have been around here, somewhere in this area. Reimer's shop would have been next to it. And then up north on the other side of these buildings, the clothes would have gone through here. And so you would have had Hare's house. Basically, it was one big building. So the murders took places in 5 places around Edinburgh. 3 of them, one was Hare's house here, one was the stables, which was sort of connected to Hare's house, then the other would have been Burke's house here. We'll get to some of the others later. So, who were Burke and Hare? Just going to look around some so you can see what's going on. They were Irishmen. They moved to Falkirk to work on the canal, the Union Canal that was being built. And then they moved to Edinburgh. So Burke took up cobbling when he moved here, started making shoes. Hare, so the building they lived in, the north part, was called the Logue house or Lowe's house. It was John Lowe was a landlord. Him and his wife, Margaret Laird, ran the place. Hare was staying with them. Presumably he had an affair with Margaret Laird, so John Logue kicked him out. Then when Logue died, he moved back in and took over the landlord business, and so that's what they were doing. And so it all got started. There was a man named Old Donald who owed Hare £4 but died of the dropsy. So they didn't know what to do. You know, he was out £4. Burke and Hare discussed it, and they heard, you know, there's going to be the anatomical college buys bodies to practice on. So they basically took his body there and got paid for it. Tried to sell it to a Dr. Monroe, but he wasn't in. But were hooked up with Robert Knox, who became their main. So we're down below Argyle House again. So this was called Tanner's Close. There were about 5 or 6 tanneries in Edinburgh at the time. One was sort of on the other side of the building here. Another would have been through that way, and so Tanner's Close ran between them. So there was a girl or old woman, depending on the accounts that you follow, named Effie. She was a cinder woman, they called her. Basically, she'd look through the burn piles and trash cans and try to find stuff she could sell. And as I said, Burke was a cobbler, so she would get leather scraps from here, and she would sell them to Burke and Hare. Well, not to Hare, but to Burke. So that's how he knew her, and they ended up, of course, killing her at one point. A little bit of whiskey does a lot of good. Speaking of which, so like I said, Reimer's shop was down here somewhere. Again, can't really give you a good picture of it. It was, from all descriptions, it seemed like it was a pub with a grocery stand in front. This is where they met most of their victims, or about half of their victims from the accounts given. So not a lot is said about David Reimer, who ran it, but William Noble was a boy who worked for him. Boy in quotes, I guess he probably a teenager, maybe younger 20s, I don't know. He testified at Burke's trial because he saw them with Margaret Doherty, who was the final victim. And odds are he probably saw them with several of their victims, just because he, again, they picked up a bunch of people at the Reimer shop. And so, you know, he probably witnessed a lot of their, not abductions, but he could have placed them with a lot of victims. They were only on trial for that last murder, so that was the only one he testified to, so we don't really know the rest, or even if he would have remembered any other people. So throughout Edinburgh, there are what are called stairs. They're basically like closes, only they've got steps going up. Edinburgh is built on several levels, so there are stairs up and down all over the place, and these are all named. So one day, or one evening, Burke found two constables escorting a drunk woman to the police station. They said they'd found her sleeping in a stair, and so don't know exactly which one. Checked some maps, tried to find the police stations, but as you can see, several of the stairs, like this one, have like roofs on them, so people might try to sleep in them. So Burke asked, "Why don't you take her home?" The police said they didn't know where she lived. Burke lied and said he knew where she lived and he'd take her for them. And of course, he took him back to Tanner's Close, and him and Hare killed her. And here we go. And here you got even this little opening here has got a place where someone might have laid down to sleep off their drunkenness. Okay, back up above the Argyle house again. Just a little filler shot, nothing to do with the talk here, just as I fill in some stuff. So, the orders of the murders. No one really knows. So we have Hare's confession, we have Burke's confession, then we have an interview that Burke did with the Edinburgh Courant. And all of them list the deaths in different orders. So, again, no one really knows when they were all killed or why. Well, why for money, but so people have tried to put them in a logical order, and Burke and Hare were drunk most of the time when they did this, so there is no real logic to it in some cases. There are all sorts of flaws with the logical orders people put in. So, like I said, I've already mentioned two people who were actually somewhere around the middle of the killings, according to all accounts. I was just in locations where I could better talk about them there. It is generally accepted that a man named Joseph the Miller, he was a miller named Joseph, was probably one of the first people, or probably the first victim. So he had a fever. They didn't want to exactly, you know, people were afraid of, early 1800s, people were afraid of diseases and stuff back then. So it was convenient to kill him. They killed him with a pillow, which was one of the reasons why people believe he was the first one, because he was killed in a different manner than most of the others. Next on the list would have been Abigail Simpson. She was from Gilmerton, a nearby town, and she sold salt. So basically she was in town on a selling trip, stayed at Hare's place. For her, basically they just got her really, really drunk and then put a heavy blanket over her face. So let nature take its course. She died on her own there. So there's mention of tea chests that come up when you study Burke and Hare. A tea chest, modern day, if you go to a store and ask for a tea chest, you'll get like a large laundry hamper, wicker basket. Back in the 1800s or early 1800s, a tea chest was just a crate that tea was shipped in, so it was a box of a certain dimension. And so every time they say tea chest, they were just being transferred in a box. And so they'd put them in a tea chest and they'd take them to Surgeon Square where they would sell them. So like I mentioned, we had someone killed with a pillow, someone killed with a blanket, and then the rest of them at one point during their confessions they mentioned one of them would cover the person's mouth and nose while the other laid across their body. So the person across the body is holding them down so they can't struggle and also making it harder for them to breathe. The other person's cutting off the airflow. After this, they started to say things like, we killed them in the usual manner, or we killed them with the method. And so it's generally believed that that's how they killed them. The rest of the, most of the rest of their victims were done this way. Although again, like I said, we have those weird outliers where they used a different method. So sometimes they didn't say how they killed the person. So it's sort of assumed that was the way that was done most of the time, but otherwise not. Okay, generally their third victim, most people sort of think he was an Englishman from Cheshire. He was there selling spunks and tinder, and spunks is just an old-fashioned term for matches. And again, this is because, like Abigail Simpson, he was from out of town, so it was sort of believed that they were doing this, locals disappearing would raise attention, people from out of town disappearing wouldn't raise attention, so they thought this was one of their earlier kills. But again, we don't know the exact order. So in the summer of 1828, Burke went back to Falkirk to visit friends and relatives. When he got back, Hare was flashing around a little more money than he had. He had pawned off a bunch of stuff before Burke left. When he got back, he suddenly had money. So Burke accused him of killing someone without, outside the business, so to speak. They had a fight, so Burke left their residence. He moved. This is maybe 50 feet over, somewhere in this general area. It was called Grindley's Close at the time. Again, it's hard to tell trying to compare old maps to modern maps because they leveled all this between, about halfway between then and now. So Hare did a solo murder of someone we don't really know any details about. He eventually admitted that he did it, but at the time he refused to admit it, and him and Burke had a fight, so Burke moved out. So this is where the other killings would have taken place, somewhere in this area. Their final killing, Margaret Docherty, took place here. What else is there? Yes, so we were talking money. So Hare suddenly had all this money, and some people have suggested there have been more than 16 victims and that they just didn't admit to that many. I sort of disagree on that, just because we have this incident here where they were obviously in and out of money, and they were making a good price. So according to most sources, Burke would have made £1 a week as a cobbler. They were selling bodies for £10 during the wintertime and £8 during the summertime, because they didn't keep as well during the summertime, so they got a lower price. So splitting the money, for one killing they were making about a month's salary. And just the fact that Hare would have made this money, been out of money, and then the idea that he would have had to pawn some stuff after making a month's salary leads me to believe that they did not kill more than the 16 they were admitted to, or they didn't have the cash flow that some people think they would have had if they had killed more than 16 people. Along those lines also, so they generally split the money. So for for a 10-pound body, Burke would get a little over 4 pounds, Hare would get a little over 5 pounds, and then Margaret Laird would get less than a pound. Now, while Hare had taken up with Margaret Laird, Burke was staying with a woman named Helen McDougall. So there's questions about how involved she was. During their last murder, two of their neighbors, Anne and James Gray, heard Miss Doherty calling for help, and Helen McDougall tried to bribe them into not saying anything about it. That being the case, they did say it, so people think she was more in it than they claim. During his trial, Burke said she had nothing to do with it. And again, there's the idea she didn't get a split of the cash like Margaret Laird did. So it's a little questionable how much she knew about what was going on, although she probably knew something was going on. It's how involved she was in the actual murders themselves. A Sergeant Fisher was the one who found the body of Mary Doherty here. Found her in one of the infamous tea chests. And that's what led to the arrest. This took place on Halloween's Eve, October 31st, 1828. It was customary sort of to have people over. Burke met Miss Doherty in Reimer's shop, claimed to be of a distant relative because she was Irish, and so invited her over for this sort of annual traditional celebration that Irish people had at the time, and of course they ended up killing her. So we're coming out of Westport here, and we're headed into the grass market. Like I said, we were just down below. There is a lot of rise and fall of the streets around here, so it's hard to say exactly where Burke and Hare lived. I'm thinking taking the bodies to the Sergeant Square, this would have been the most logical route. We do know that they went through the grass market. As you can see, it's a weekend here, so there are a lot of market activities going on, little stalls going on. So the hanging of Burke took place, let's see, January 28th, 1829. The trial was Christmas Day of 1828. So he was hung on the grass market here. Let's see, a bunch of the pubs along here were in existence at the time. The White Hart and the Last Drop were two of the most famous. I believe Maggie's is also down here. The hanging drew a lot of attention. Large crowds filled the area. People supposedly were renting space up in the buildings up above so people could, view. I think it was a rainy day, so people were like, luxury box seats of the dime. The hanging would have taken place at the far end here. So, interesting story about some killings here. So there was a grandmother and they called him her dumb grandson. Supposedly he was mute, I'm assuming, from that. They just described him as dumb. killed her, killed him. Supposedly, he was like terrified because he just saw his grandmother killed. Couldn't fit them in a tea chest. They put them in a herring barrel, and they were transporting them along, Grass Market is one of their normal routes, as we found out. And Hare's horse, when it got to the Grass Market, just stopped for some reason, wouldn't go any further. Hare ended up shooting the horse. They hired a porter to move the barrel the rest of the way to Surgeon's Stair. Supposedly, in one of the accounts, it talks about Hare trying to cover up the bullet hole in his horse. Don't know if he was trying to get some sort of payment for it, insurance, or just trying to hide the fact that they shot the horse and didn't want to explain why he shot it. But that happened. And then, like I said, it would have been at the far end here is where most people say the scaffolds were set up. Probably like just the other side of these tents. I don't know if these trees would have been there or not. Okay, so here we are at the other end of the Grass Market. Like I said, here's a bunch of these pubs were around. Again, most tours say this is the general area where the scaffolds were set up on this side of the market. What else can I say? So again, I think the bodies would have proceeded up this way, headed once more towards, we go around this way, we get to the Cowgate, and that road will take us to Southbridge, which will take us eventually to the Surgeon Square. Somewhere around here, there is some place which claims to have a piece of Burke. Basically, so they made wallets and stuff out of his skin, and there is a place around here, I don't know, maybe it's next street up, I'll check that later maybe, where they do the witchcraft tours and stuff like that, and they have a little card case which is presumably made out of his skin. We will see about that later. So there's the Grass Market again. We're coming into Cowgate, and again, this in my opinion would have been the route they would have taken most likely, just based on the maps I've seen. Like I said, we know they went through the Grass Market based on Burke's testimony, so it just makes sense this is the straight shot in the direction they're going. So a stout old woman named Margaret Haldane was one of their victims. A few months later, her son came looking for her. Not her son, sorry, her daughter. Actually, the daughter's name was Margaret, my mistake. So Miss Haldane didn't give a first name for her daughter's name was Margaret, came looking for her. Burke offered, yeah, I remember your mom, I'll show you what happened to her. And he did. This was a solo killing done by Burke alone. So we have Hare killed, one by himself, Burke killed, one by himself. Still on the Cowgate, sort of a dismal looking place, or very shady at least. Not a lot of sun gets down here. So there was a washerwoman they were familiar with named Miss Hostler, or Hostler, depending on which account you read. Whether there begins with an H or not depends on the account you read. Killed her. Again, there's not a lot of detail on a lot of these because, again, they were drunk when they were doing them, so they didn't have a lot of details on them. Okay, and I'm seeing a mistake I might have made. So that bridge up there is the Southgate Bridge, or that's the street where they would have turned on to take them to the Surgeon Square. So I keep forgetting that the streets sort of rise and lower here, and looking at a map from above, you can't really tell where you're at. So they would have either had to go off the cow gate and find another way up there, which there are, again, plenty of stairs and plenty of little closes and stuff that go up there. And so, I was a little off on some of my figuring of this because I was looking at a two-dimensional map and not thinking that the streets here are three-dimensional. Before we go up, we will mention Anne McDougal, who was a cousin of Helen McDougal, who they killed. And again, she came to visit Helen, and Burke Hare killed her. So interesting thing about this is, about this time, Margaret Laird started saying, we can't trust Helen McDougal, we should kill her as well, which they never did. But part of that was she was Scottish, the other three were all Irish, so they didn't think they could trust her. She was, not like them, so to speak. But this is another reason why I'm sort of questioning how deeply involved was Helen McDougal in this, because if she was as deep in these killings as the other people were, then they might have been a little less apt to try to kill her, or talk about killing her at least. Making my way up to get up to the bridge I thought I was going to wind up on. One of those infamous stairs I talked about coming up here. So there was a boy, Jamie Wilson, or James Wilson, they called him Daft Jamie. Basically had an argument with his mother, she kicked him out. They made up, but he decided he wanted to stay out and live on his own on the streets. Went around barefoot, never wore a cap, which, everyone wore a cap in those days. And so, a very sort of popular person. Everyone knew he did like odd jobs and had a little bit of crafting skills and stuff like that, so he could fix things or do whatever people needed. Didn't drink, and that's the big problem, because Burke Hare, he was one of the later victims. Burke Hare were getting a little more courageous with their killings, so they were starting to kill locals now. Didn't drink, put up a huge fight when they tried to kill him, but they eventually succeeded. And so they killed him, took him to Dr. Knox. Dr. Knox, the first thing she did was to cut off the head and feet, because those are the things that would have identified Jamie more than anything else. Just a little brief interrupt. Here's the Scottish Museum, the National Museum, which I will be visiting later. I've been there before. They don't have much Burke Hare stuff in it. So anyway, Knox cut off the head and feet, which normally a body, another reason why I don't think that they killed as many people as people say, is that a body would last several lectures. They didn't do a full autopsy in one lecture. And so they would generally do the internal stuff first, just because it degrades a little faster, it starts to smell faster, etc., etc. And so the fact that Knox decided to do James Wilson's head and feet first makes me think that he was trying to take away any chance of anyone recognizing him. So he knew foul play was afoot, I think. There's a lot of people argue, did he know, did he not? I think he knew that these weren't just grave robberies going on, these were actual murders going on. But again, it was never brought up in any of the trials. He was actually never tried for it. Buying and selling bodies wasn't illegal. Murder and grave robbing was. Throughout their trials, Burke and Hare, Hare was never put on trial. Burke insisted that he wasn't a grave robber, and Hare, throughout his testimony and stuff, insisted he wasn't a grave robber, because he knew they could sell all the bodies they wanted as long as no one could connect them with a robbery, or not a robbery, a murder. So as long as, no one could prove that they were committing murder or digging up graves, they could buy and sell anything they wanted. And so Knox was held innocent pretty much because all he was doing was buying bodies. Had someone come forth and said no, he knew these bodies were being murdered, he might have been tried as an accomplice. But until then, he got off scot-free. Anyway, so we're going to go down this way and take a right, and that's going to take us down towards the Surgeon Square. So here we have a plaster cast of Burke's head, taken after he was executed. This is a notebook which was made from his skin, presumably. So John Brogan was a cousin of either Burke or Hare, I can't remember which. Supposedly he knew about what was going on. He was never brought to trial. And then here we have Dr. Knox's violin. Somewhere around here, Burke's skeleton is supposed to be. I'm going to see if I can't find it. So this is a mock-up of what a anatomy lecture theater would have been like. Knox was charging, I forget how much, but the idea he could buy a body for 10 pounds was not really that ridiculous, considering that you could fit well over 20 people in here. He was charging enough to make back the money he cost. So it was, I'm not going to say it was big business, but it was in a sense profitable for him. So here we are a few blocks south of the museum, or the Surgeon Square, Newington Road. 4 Newington Road, which would have been somewhere around here. 6 is the Chinese restaurant, so I'm assuming it would have been the same building. Dr. Knox lived. Like I said, he got away with most of it. There was a lot of social, no one really liked him. The night of the trial, when his involvement was found out, people came, they broke a lot of windows. Police had to keep them out of here. There's also riots at the Surgeon Square as well. Again, police had to keep people out. Other than that, he got away scot-free, except for the fact that no one really wanted to go to his lectures anymore, just because he wasn't really popular. He was connected with murder, and he got away with it. No one liked him really, so his teaching pretty much died. And that's all for him. Okay, so I had mentioned there are 5 places where killings took place, and we've covered 4 of them. The 5th one is Gibbs Close, right here. It's now a shop entrance. It used to be a alleyway type place. So basically, Burke's brother Constantine lived here. And we've covered all but the last of their murders. So Mary Patterson and Janet Brown. Some people say they were prostitutes. It's hard to get any information on that. Basically, they met William Burke. He invited them over to his place, which he ended up taking to Constantine's place. So this here, what we're looking at, this is Canongate. And so this is, again, we're getting into the logical order of their murders, and most lists agree that Mary Patterson was killed as one of the first 6 or 7 people. But this is, like I said, Canongate is way outside their normal range of victim finding. So possibly just because his brother's house was nearby, he tried it. But other than that, like I said, this is outside their normal range. So they're either getting very bold at this time, or there's just randomness and you can't try to find a logical order. But anyway, so Janet and Mary were brought here to Gibbs Close. They were getting them drunk, and then Helen McDougal came along and looking for Burke. Got angry, kicked Janet Brown out. Mary Patterson was too drunk to go. So Janet went back to where they were staying, and they killed Mary. They tried to lure Janet back in later, but her landlady, she told her landlady what was going on. She got suspicious and warned her against it. Actually came back looking for Mary Patterson, and they claimed, oh, she got sober and went home. So Mary Patterson, Dr. Knox had a picture of her painted, which I'm going to try to find if they have a copy of it somewhere. And that's all we have for them. So here we can see part of Monument Hill, a little bit of Waverly Station down there. Nothing to do with our tour today, but just a nice quiet spot where I can recap some stuff and tie up some loose ends. Not quite done yet completely, but let's get these out of the way. So I mentioned Burke made about £1 a week, and cobbling shoes, and that they got 10 pounds per body in the wintertime, 8 pounds per body in the summertime. These were, of course, 1828 pounds, which in 2022 money would be worth a little over 90 pounds. So, wintertime they're making about 900 pounds modern money, or 720 pounds in the summer. For American, that would be, or American or European, so that would be roughly a little over $100 or a little over 100 euros either way. So, again, 1,000 in the winter time, 800 in the summertime. So not a bad price for one night's work, as long as you're willing to risk getting caught. So mentioned Margaret Laird and Helen McDougal, and throughout the confessions and all of that, they went by Laird and McDougal throughout. At their trial and all the paperwork there, it was suddenly Margaret Hare and Helen Burke. And that's because men and women couldn't testify against their husbands' wives. And so suddenly they put great emphasis. There's no record of them actually being married, but they lived together. So it would have been common law marriage. Burke actually had a wife and children back in Ireland, who some people say abandoned, some people, it's just a matter of he came to work on the canal and they never followed. But so he was actually guilty of bigamy if he took Helen McDougal on as a wife, but no one really went in that way, or nitpicked about that, let's say. So Burke was the only one to be tried because Hare turned King's evidence, which means basically you can say anything you want against someone else and it won't be used back against you. So there was a lot of Mary Doherty, the one that they were tried for killing. Was she murdered or not? And it was very difficult to prove. The method they used for killing her, they claimed that she died of natural causes, and they had no reason to believe otherwise. The coroner couldn't prove otherwise, So finally, Hare turned King's evidence and, basically stabbed Burke in the back. Some people blame him for this, but at the same time, Burke nearly did the same thing to him. It was a matter of when they were first arrested, Burke put in a testimony that he was working at home, making shoes, and a stranger came in with a box and asked if he could store it in his house. Burke said yes. Later, the stranger took something out of the box and put it in the straw under, that they were using as a bed, and it ended up being the body of Mary Doherty. And then he later claimed that this stranger was William Hare. Now that right there, pretty much everyone in the neighborhood knew that Burke and Hare already knew each other. So claiming that they were strangers, this was a big, obvious lie to their neighbors. But the police even saw some holes in the theory, so didn't really do much, go far with it. And it could be one of the reasons why the police continued to pursue the case. But eventually, Hare turned King's evidence, so he was off, and because he's the one who turned evidence, Margaret Laird, or Margaret Hare as she was called during the trial, couldn't be tried for anything he said. And this is another reason, some people say there were more than 16 bodies. It was in Hare's best interest to mention everything that they did, because he couldn't be tried for anything extra. So it was in his best interest to mention everyone that they killed. Burke, if he wanted any kind of revenge on Hare, it was in his best interest to try to find an extra name they could add to the list, but he couldn't, or he didn't. And so, like I said, Hare got off completely. Before I leave, or before I forget, the families of Mary Patterson and James Wilson tried to have Hare convicted of their murders, but again, he had already mentioned them during his King's evidence that he gave, and the only reason they would have given, only reason that they would have pursued those matters was that he had mentioned that they killed him. So he got off scot-free on those two as well. And that is all for now. You'll be back later. Burke and Hare went up the stair with a body in a box for Dr. Knox. Yeah, so as incensed as people acted about, the murders Burke and Hare committed, it didn't stop them from making little rhymes about it later. Just sort of part of the whole gallows humor that sort of went on at the time. Just thought I'd bring that up. So this is West Bow Street. This is the Katie's Witchery Tour. This is just south of the Royal Mile. And in here, what we have is we've got another piece of William Burke's. This is from one of his hands. And so they have a copy of this on display. Okay, so here the Scottish National Museum is having an exhibit on anatomy, and this is a model of what the College of Physicians used to look like back in Burke and Hare's day. So here are two more life masks. We got Burke and Hare. These were made when they were in prison. Comparing these to the newspaper pictures of them, they're very different. So even though Hare got away, throughout England for the next few months, several people were beaten up on suspicion of being William Hare. It's just a matter of they had no photographs back then, bad sketches or bad descriptions in the newspapers, so any stranger that came to town, people thought it was Hare, and they'd beat him up. We have a guess at the order that people were killed in. Abigail Simpson. Many of these are names that I've already mentioned, or
the Lord Advocate must
Patterson.
choose two prime suspects, Burke or Hare. One will stand trial, one will walk free to return for confession.
I believe these are placed in the order that the museum thinks that they were actually killed in. Yeah, the order I gave them in was more along the lines of what best fit with my walk around Edinburgh.
Hare's evidence is enough to try Burke and MacDougall for the murder of Mary Doherty. Prosecutors also want to put Burke to trial for the murders of Mary Patterson and Jane Wilson. While there is evidence, they are prevented from doing so by Helen MacDougall.
So I said earlier I was going to try to find Burke's skeleton. It is not in the surgery museum. It is actually in the surgical school's anatomy collection. Normally the public can't see it, but it happens that it's on loan to the National Museum for their anatomy exhibit. So got here at the right time. End of October 2022, you will no longer be able to see it unless you go to the anatomy school and get like special permission. But this is William Burke's skeleton. So I'm up near the top of Arthur's Seat here. You can get a very lovely view of the city. Just kind of recap or follow up. So Hare, or not Hare, Burke, we finally found a skeleton. He was autopsied by Alexander Monroe Tertius. He was the third Alexander Monroe who worked for the Surgeons College. He was the one that they were going to originally sell the body of Old Donald to. But so interesting there is, if he had been in or if he had bought the body, then he might not be the hero of the story, but he might be the villain and Dr. Knox might be the hero. So part of Burke's sentencing was that he be dissected for medical students, and so Dr. Monroe's the one who did that. Like I said, Hare got away, basically. He was escorted out of town by police. They had to make like 3 stops before the crowds lost them, because the crowds wanted to kill Hare, and police were trying to protect him because he'd given King's evidence, and so he was allowed to go free. So like I said, they had to go to like 2 towns before they finally lost the people who were following them. As I said, from that point on, throughout the United Kingdom, or throughout the British Isles, people were getting beaten up for the next few months because they were strangers in town and people thought they might be William Hare. Helen McDougall and Margaret Laird also disappeared from history. So the 3 of them, McDougall, Hare, and Laird, there's a lot of theories about what happened to them, and most people like to pick the worst one, but we have no evidence to support any of them as being the correct one of what happened, so I'm going to leave off to that as to what happened to them. No one really knows, as opposed to going into theories. And that is all for now. So hope you enjoyed the video, and if you get a chance to visit Edinburgh, it's a nice place to visit. Have a good day.